hello. My name is Michael Hassman, if I haven't spoken to you previously. I'm a trainer at Claromentis, and today is going to be a webinar showing some of the newer features in Claromentis 8.9. We will be looking at some features from slightly older versions as well, depending on what version you're from. Some of these might seem like other features. We don't want to just focus on the 8.9 side of things, as there are some other features which might be beneficial to you based on being on, I don't know, like 8.5, for instance, or something along those lines. If I haven't muted you already, I'm going to mute everyone just to let you know this call has been recorded, and I will be adding it to Discover shortly after this for something to look back on and share with other users if necessary. But with that said, let me continue, and I'm going to start with sharing my screen. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. I will more than happily answer them, if I can, of course. We will make sure that we stop after every sort of feature that we've looked at, just to go over those questions there. Okay, so as mentioned, I'm just going to share my screen with you guys. And the first thing we'll see, hopefully, is the newest feature and the flagship feature, should I say, for Claromentis 8.9, which is the new announcements. Okay. Now, Claromentis announcements for a long time have been interesting, I shall say. And what that will previously has allowed you to do is alert people to certain features or things that are occurring within the intranet, within the business. However, they weren't very striking. It wasn't something that you could necessarily confirm with people that they've read and understood it. And also, it wasn't necessarily something that would immediately show up and jump out at people. And,
sorry, you're not sharing your screen.
Oh, am I not?
No.
Thank you. Perfect. There we go. Is that showing now?
Yeah.
Super. Thank you. Slight technical difficulties. But yes, sorry, as we can see here, as I was mentioning, here is the announcements feature. And this is what it has changed to in Claromentis 8.9. So here we can see that upon logging in for the first time, or since an announcement has been created, this will be the first thing that is prompted to you. It will pop up from the homepage and inform you of the latest announcement or the latest information that is being provided to you. We can see here, of course, that there is an initial title and then, of course, a description below, basically explaining what this announcement might be about. In terms of configuring and adjusting the announcement, we can see, in this case, for instance, that there is a confirmation button here, allowing us to confirm and say that we have read this announcement. With this feature implemented, we'll notice that we can't dismiss this and we can't really deviate away from the announcement until we have confirmed it, which of course is very important for very important business announcements or things along those lines. So we can see, for instance, like so. If I say, yep, I can then dismiss this. And now I can continue with whatever I was doing or my features or requirements within the intranet itself. Now, it's worth mentioning that this tool is available from the front end. It has its own application now. Previously, as we can see on an older version here, announcements were tied to the news application, and the old announcement component, as I mentioned, looked like this. So there wasn't anything immediately jumping out. There is no way to confirm that you've read this, etc. This is on a slightly older version of Claromentis, and of course, the changes there are quite large. As mentioned, this older version as well doesn't have an application for announcements. It's tied within the news application itself, where we have now separated that and applied it to its own feature here. Now, as mentioned, if we click on this, this is going to allow me to see all of the announcements that have potentially been created and allow me to read those announcements that are available to me. So not only will I see them when they initially pop up like so, if I've confirmed them, and I can come back on here and look at the previous announcements that I have read and understood as well. It's worth mentioning that from the front end, the only announcements you will see are the ones that are currently live, if you will. So we can see that these have all been published on a certain date, and they will, when you are creating an announcement, as we can see here, it's going to ask you to put a to date on there, basically. And simply put, once that expires, the announcement will no longer show from the front end list there. You will still be able to see them from the admin side, and you will be able to configure them, as we can see. But realistically, this is the information that an end user will see. As we saw very briefly there, however, we can look at creating and adding an announcement. We have the options. And what this will allow us to do is write a particular title, have an abstract. This can also come in various languages if necessary. And then, of course, we have our definition of our publish date and our style. This is going to allow us to define whether or not it will be displayed as a banner, displaying the announcement at the bottom here, a modal, more centralized, and then an overlay up at the top. You can also, as we saw, define whether or not this acknowledgement is required. And if so, what will the acknowledgement text say? Okay, so by default, we can see that it's going to say, I have read and understood, but we can change that to be whatever we would like it to be. You can also define at this point where the target users or for this announcement, who it should be aimed at. And then, of course, also configuring whether or not an email should be sent to those targeted users, initially informing them of the fact that this announcement has been created. And that means, of course, that it can potentially lead them to the site. They will then access it and see the announcement there. So these are the standard sort of features. This is the configuration and creation of the announcement itself, all very straightforward, as you can see. And then if we look on the admin side, we will actually see a full breakdown of the existing announcements, okay? And this is going to show initially 50 of the announcements per page, and this is going to show us an entire history of all of the announcements. So not only the ones that are currently active, like on the front end, this will also show any announcements that have expired as well. For instance, we can see this flexible working one. Its end date was the 31st of March, so it will not appear on the front end, but of course we can see it as an administrator here. You'll also notice that this will have a series of statistics attributed to these announcements as well. And we can see, of course, basically a percentage view of how many people have viewed these. As it expands, we'll be able to see that number, and that will be defined better for us. And you'll also notice if you have confirmed or defined that on an announcement, you need to confirm that you've understood it. There will also be this acknowledged progression bar as well, showing all of the people who've not only seen this, but have also acknowledged it. Okay, the reason, of course, that this isn't available for these two is simply because they haven't been defined with the acknowledged requirements. It's only the recent one I've created and the sort of default initial one that we've played around with and generated here. But yeah, so that is the announcements tool. It is all very straightforward, hopefully. Is there any questions about that at all? As mentioned, if there is anything that you need to ask, please feel free to put it in the chat and I'll look at that quickly.
Michael, is it possible to see the individuals that have acknowledged?
So from a full breakdown of not only just this percentage viewing, but those individuals themselves. That is indeed possible. So if we go into, say, for instance, the flexible working one here, this is going to give us a fuller breakdown of the announcement itself. And then, of course, underneath, we will basically see that information as necessary. So we will see, based on this, this has only been distributed to 3 users, hence the 33%. But we can see that the administrator or the Claromentis administrator profile has both viewed and acknowledged this on this date and time, whereas the other 2 users that this has been sent out and distributed to have not. But you will be able to see that as a full breakdown. Of course, if we look at something like the one here, again, we'll see that this has been distributed to all registered on this intranet. And we can see again that currently only the Claromentis administrator has seen this, but realistically, this will show everyone else. And eventually, once they have viewed this and acknowledged it as well, their list will also, or their data will also appear on here, showing the date and time that they have done so. Good question. So I can see on here as well, Michelle has said, can this information be exported? So bear with me. So if we go back here, I believe at this time, the data, actually, can it be exported from the audit?
Sorry, I can jump in here and say it can't be exported from this view just yet, but it is on our to-do list for the next iteration of improvements.
Perfect. Thank you. If anyone hasn't met Gilly, this is the product owner, person behind a lot of these features. So it's very good to have her here to help me. But yes, as mentioned there, the export isn't available right now, but it will be a feature implemented in the future, I'm sure. Perfect. Okay. Are there any other questions in regards to the announcements feature? Looking good. Okay, fantastic. So in regards to other aspects, particularly from Claromentis 8.9, there are a couple of other things I wanted to show. The next one is the thank you component. Now, again, this is something I imagine a lot of you are quite familiar with. The thank you component has been around for quite some time. And of course, it allows you to shout out other users and provide them with the thanks for maybe helping you within a sort of business requirement or anything along those lines. Now that still exists, but we've made some additional improvements to that to help sort of get better statistics and also thank more than just an individual or a couple of users at one point. So once more, if I jump back to a slightly older version just for a reference here, we'll be able to see the thank you component. Okay, and again, we can see that this is going to be thanking specific users. You're allowed to like these and say, yes, very nice, etc. And if I was to say thank you myself, once more, I have the opportunity to define a couple of users here, define them all here, and then add the comment exactly why I'm thanking them. Now, with the improvements to 8.9, there has been some very nice adjustments to this. So again, here we can see the thank you component from an 8.9 perspective, and there are a couple of things that you might already see slightly different here. So the first one is we don't just have the ability to thank individual users, we can also now thank groups of users defined within the Claromentis people application. This is going to allow you, of course, all of them to be alerted and notified, but instead of you having to type in each individual name of a user's department or a department in question, you can, of course, just add the group here. Another option here is the ability to add a comment now to a particular thank you as well, and also link to it as well. But we also have this additional feature here, which is showing the sort of core values within your business. So for instance, if I go to say thank you now, we can see, of course, the same features are pretty much available. We can select a user, and as mentioned, we can add a group on here. We can give our description, why we're thanking this individual or this group. But as mentioned, there is also this core values section here as well. Now, we've set this up to be in alignment currently from the demo site here with the Claromentis core values. So, of course, we have our collaboration, commitment to customers, creativity, fun, honesty, and innovation. And that just means that we can thank sort of, the thank you is targeted for those sort of reasons. If we look at the application, again, unlike the older versions, thank you does have its own front-end application now as well. And if we go in here, we will basically see a list of all of the thanks that have been provided, as well as a breakdown of the sort of core values, which thanks have been given within which core values of Claromentis here. As mentioned, again, this is where we can once more say thank you, but from the admin side, this is where we can look at configuring these things. Oh, apologies, Hilary, sorry. Let me go back for you. So there's a couple of ways to initially have a thank you there. So the first thing we have is just if you have the component, so from the Pages application, maybe on your home page or a particular departmental page, you can add a thank you component there. And then what you'll see, of course, is just from the application here or from the component that's been added to your home page or wherever, you'll see this option up at the top to say thank you. And as mentioned, this is going to bring up this pop-up window for you. You can type in the individual users or group of users, define the core value, and then give the description as to why you're thanking them. That's potentially the main way that you will mostly be using this thank you component. From a sort of a use case, we often find it very useful to have this component on your homepage. Brings a lot of people there, and it gives a reason to sort of commit and add a thank you. But as mentioned, it does have its own separate front-end application. So if you're not choosing to have it on a homepage or a particular departmental page, you can simply say thank you through the application here. And again, the feature is pretty much the same. We just hit say thank you up at the top, and then the options available to us will be the same.
Just to add, it's also available from someone's profile under the thank you tab.
Indeed it is, thank you. So if we go to say Dan here, for instance, Or the suspense, I'm sure. Here we go. We can see exactly as Gilly's mentioned, there is a thank you tab within a person's profile. And what this will allow us to see, get the opportunity to say thanks to this individual. So if I say thank you, okay, we can see that that's going to default to the user, Dan Butler. And again, we can define the core values and the descriptions here. So that's a very good question. In terms of approval, I don't think that feature has yet been implemented. It's something that has been mused upon, but basically a thank you is just open to everyone. It can be monitored and deleted as necessary, but realistically the thank you will just go live. Yes, so if we go back. And then from here, of course, we have the admin side as well. And this is where we'll see some of the information in regards to the thank you component as well. So from an admin side, we'll be able to see the statistics. So we'll be able to break this down by the thank you notes, the users, or the core values themselves. Clicking on any of these will basically allow us to break down and see all of that information relating to, as we've selected here, the core values. We can then export that as a CSV, run potentially a report on that using Excel, etc. But that will be the same with, of course, users here as well. Basically, how many times a user has been thanked. And then, of course, the other option there was simply just the thank you notes. Okay, and again, this is going to show a bit more of a fuller sort of breakdown here. So again, not only will we see if a group has been thanked, the total thanked users because of that group, etc., the core value, but also the description of what was thanked there, as well as any sort of likes or comments on there. So those are the statistics we'll be able to do. Again, you can export any of those options and run a bit more of a detailed report if necessary. We have our configuration here. And what this will allow you to do is, of course, see, you can define whether or not the line manager of that user who's been thanked will also receive a notification, basically informing them that a member of their team has been thanked for some work. And also you can choose whether or not you want to allow comments from the thank yous. So as we saw, there is that option to add a comment, anything like that. If you don't want that feature applied, you have the ability to select no, and you will simply just have the sort of liking feature there. And then the last option here is just the core values section. So this is something you can choose to enable or disable entirely. So if this isn't something you really want to implement within your thank you component, as I said, it is a new feature on there, but if it's something you don't see yourselves using, that's totally fine. You can choose to disable it here. Likewise, if you do want to use this, you can also configure it that the core values will be mandatory, meaning that when you are thanking a user, they will have to specify the core value at the same time. And then underneath that, of course, we simply just have the core values in question. So as mentioned, these are just using the default Claromentis ones here, but you can add your own core values. You can apply anything that is more sort of focused on your own sort of business environments, etc., and allow you to add those as the core value options instead. We can also choose to hide a couple of these or make changes to the existing ones if necessary. But yeah. Any other questions about the thank you component there? Oh, looking good. Okay, perfect. So there are a couple of other features. As I mentioned, we will be showing some stuff not necessarily from Claromentis 8.9, but from 8.8 and a little bit earlier as well, just so you can see some other features depending on the version you're currently on. But these are some of the major factors of Claromentis 8.9. A couple of other things that I wanted to show. First off, we have our statistics. So some of you might be already familiar with this, the statistics section effectively allowing us to see how many people have potentially, as we can see here, logged in or visited the site. We have the opportunity to view other information here, like the news, the documents, etc. But the new features that have been added to the 8.9 version of the statistics is also a breakdown of the knowledge base and pages applications as well. This is going to allow us to see a bit more information over these applications. And again, if we look in, say, something like pages here, it's going to show us again the page views per site, including any of the sub pages, etc. And this is going to break down, which ones have been viewed. Oh, perfect. Thank you for the questions there. So Gilly's helping, which is wonderful. But yes, so not only can we add multiple core values, as Gilly's mentioned there, but if we jump back quickly to the thank you components, in regards to your question there, Candice, in regards to who did the thanking themselves, that's displayed here. So this picture here is defining which user has done that thanking. So we can see basically, you can maybe tell by the layout here, it looks like a speech bubble coming from Dan. That's the sort of design we've gone for. And you can see that these are the individuals they are thanking, but this is the person who has done said thanking, I guess. Great. Okay, sorry, so yes, so very quickly, again, just looking at the statistics once more, we can see, again, that these are just going to show us a bit more information about some of the more well-used features within Claromentis. So, as previously discussed, the older versions of statistics was quite restrictive in some of the information it was showing. The same amount of data is, I guess, still there, but it's just the fact that this has been added to a couple of other applications which are very frequently used, and it's nice to see that sort of information. He says that, of course, where there's no action on knowledge base whatsoever, but realistically, this is something that we would use quite frequently. But again, it's going to show breakdowns and questions, basically when they've been modified or interacted with for either the articles themselves or the questions over a period of time. I could expand this for more than just this month, but at the time that's not the case. It's a very good question, Jen. Let's have a look. So I believe, so it's showing that. So from this perspective, it's just going to show you basically the number of views. Not necessarily anything else in regards to that. The number of views and the unique views. So how many specific users have seen this? So this has been visited, for instance, 69 times, but only 2 unique views have been done on this. So from the statistics here, it is more of a sort of general information. You should be able to, if we go to admin and then look at the audit tool, and then from here, we can view our logs. Category, pages. View page. So you can see from the actual the audit tool here, this will allow you to basically say when a user has viewed a particular page. Again, this can be exported as a CSV. That's a really good idea, Eric. Yes, that's a fantastic idea. Exactly. If you wanted to lead people directly to the page, you can certainly use the new announcements tool to link to that. But if you want to make sure that everyone, of course, has seen that, the audit tool here will give you a full breakdown and give you a list of basically the date and time that these individuals visited and which page that exactly was based on the object here. So it is possible. No worries at all, Jen. Perfect. But yes, the statistics again is realistically more of just a general overview to see that people are interacting, not necessarily the specifics. But previously, it was only utilizing our old legacy content called publish, which of course is legacy. So it wasn't very useful having that still as an initial viewing thing. So adding pages just seemed like the right thing to do there. Okay. So again, in regards to this, there are a couple of other features that I just wanted to mention. Nothing huge at this point. As I said, the major sort of introductions of 8.9 were the tweaks to the thank you component and most importantly, the announcements tool. But we do have a couple of other things. So it's quite hard to say, as I don't really have or show exactly, as I don't really have too much content in regards to this on here. But the global search, the search bar up here, has introduced a couple of other things as well. So you can also search for particular galleries and photos within the application. So I think we've got a couple of galleries on here. So for instance, if we wanted to search for a particular gallery here or a particular image within there, that is now also available within the global search, allowing you to help with stuff like that. Fantastic. Yes, Stephanie. So there are a couple of options. Yes. Okay. So exactly that. So the announcement itself will be dismissible. It will still always be available to go back to the announcements application. And if you added the link there, it could be accessed. But in regards to potentially having a permanent link that you want to sort of access certain things, that can always be applied to your menu bar up at the top for the period of time that it still remains relevant. Or as Eric has mentioned there, you can utilize the company links tool. And this will allow you to apply a certain URL, either internal or external. And that will allow you to distribute that to maybe all staff or just particular staff members, and having that again readily available. And that will, of course, depending on whichever page you are, the company links will still remain and something you can still utilize. In regards to the announcement itself, as mentioned, it will not remain. As soon as you sort of dismissed it, if you will, that's it, sort of disappeared. But again, they are still always readily available in the application itself. You're welcome. Perfect. So the last couple of features really is just some additional enhancements to the Pages tool as well. So of course, I'm just going to edit my homepage very quickly here, just so we can see these. They're not too major at this point. Again, these are just a couple of things. One of them is actually slightly being implemented from Claromentis 8 as well, or 8.8. But the first thing I wanted to showcase is when it comes to adding a brand new component within a page, we have sort of refined the way in which you can pick these. So as you can see, when selecting to add a component, it's not just going to give us a full list of all of the components, although technically it is doing that as it's on all categories, but we do have these filtered on the left-hand side as well to make it a bit clearer which ones might be beneficial depending on your needs. So we can see, for instance, that we have our calendar, occasions, and events options. If I select that, that's going to search and filter all of the components that are relevant to that sort of criteria. Likewise, we would go for like embed and custom, learning and knowledge base. Once more, it's going to filter those appropriately. You can also change the view to a list view here. This might make things a little bit clearer to see, as well as just search particular components within those categories if there are a large amount and you're only trying to define and pinpoint a specific one. Which does bring me to the next point, which is the new Twitter component. Okay, so this is something that previously, when it came to adding sort of social media to the Claromentis features or software, it would really require a standard embedding component, which would allow you to sort of add the URL, etc. Oh, I see. Okay, Eric, that's a good question. Gilly, as far as I'm aware, the announcements themselves will, once you've dismissed them, they will always be dismissed. Is that correct? Or is there some additional features to what Eric is requesting?
Yeah, at the moment it's just it's designed to only show once until accepted or dismissed. But if we get the feedback that this is something that is needed, then we can look into adding this in the future to be able to create a repeated announcement.
Mm-hmm. What I would suggest for maybe a short-term solution, Eric, if that is something, and I can totally see the benefit of having a particularly striking area of which is going to have some information. Again, it's not necessarily something you could then dismiss after the individuals have seen it, but maybe at the top, for instance, you could use like a text component. Okay, if we look at this, there we go. You can actually sort of change when you're applying the text. It's been a bit slow. There we go. You can apply a different background color to make it sort of stand out, anything like that. And again, it won't necessarily be considered an announcement, as it will always remain on that page until you choose to edit and delete it. But if it is for a period of time that that information needs to be made available, this could be a useful solution for now.
One thing I completely forgot to mention actually is that we're also going to add an announcements component to pages, so that you can, similar to the old component, you could add that to a page and have it remain there. So that component could potentially have an option to specify which announcements you want to stick there on that specific page. So that might be a good option as well.
Fantastic. Okay, Donnie's mentioned there, sorry, we would also like a repeated announcement. Currently we have them pinned at the top for a defined number of days. Fantastic. Yes, again, I can certainly see the benefit of these. What's more, the component itself wouldn't necessarily accommodate that for now, but it is certainly worth considering. And obviously, the idea of having these sort of webinars can really give us some feedback and thoughts of how we could potentially improve these tools. So I do appreciate those ideas. It does seem like a really good idea. Yeah. That is true. A news article could definitely sort of benefit from that. If you had like a slider news component like this, you could add it at the top of every page, and that should have that similar effect. But I do appreciate that it might be nice to have a dedicated component to it in regards to that, because of course with news, it would mean that you would see it within the application itself, etc. But certainly there are, the good thing about Claromentis is the fact that it's very modular, will allow you to utilize different applications in different ways. But nonetheless, it is very good to hear that feedback. Thank you. Perfect. Okay, so as I was mentioning, sorry, very quickly, the Twitter component that we've recently added. Previously, we were relying on an embed component to do that, but if we look down, again, we can see this is what the Twitter component would look like. And simply, it's just a case of adding the URL for the particular Twitter page you want. And this will then simply show every tweet made, basically. It's very useful, or a very simple way of applying this, and it just makes the process a little bit easier in regards to some information there. Okay. Perfect. So in regards to the major changes and the features of Claromentis 8.9, those are realistically the main ones. There isn't necessarily too much more to focus on. As I said, announcements has been the biggest sort of feature for this application or this version. Are there any other questions that anyone has around those features at all? That's a very good question, Andre. So yes and no, I would assume. So the trouble is with some of the social medias, they have a limit. It's realistically from their perspective and their licensing in terms of being able to add these feeds. So Facebook, we can add a feed. I don't think it doesn't have its own unique component yet. Potentially that is something we can also add. But as far as I'm aware, say something like Instagram or LinkedIn, for instance, they're a little bit more restrictive on the distribution of their content off-site, really. And it hasn't been particularly easy for us to create that. Gilly, I'm not too sure if there's been sort of discussion on your end of being able to create these other social media feeds, because they would be fantastic. And obviously correct me if I'm wrong in some of those restrictions, but I believe that is more of a social media side than us. Is that right?
Yeah, we have looked into this before. Twitter was definitely the easiest one to communicate with. The way we've built the Twitter component is based on something called OEmbed, which I can't describe very much because I'm not very technical, but it was done in a way that will allow us to integrate with more services going forward. So this is something that we will be coming back to and seeing how we can expand that.
Fantastic. It's a very good question, Eric.
Is this about the badges one?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I think it's in our roadmap, so we just need to get to it soon. I think there is a way to delete it directly from the database if this is an urgent requirement before this is properly released. But we are planning on adding this functionality, definitely.
Perfect. And are you aware much of the weather and stock components as well, Gilly? Unfortunately, it's not something I'm aware of in terms of updating when it comes to them being limited.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the stock component and whether I think they're dependent on an API. Probably Michael Christian will be able to respond to this if he's still in here.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, cool.
We do have a stock component. I think it depends on because we do rely on third-party API, and sometimes they what they're allowed to pull in is different from case-by-case basis. And then I think if you have an issue with the stock component, feel free to kind of submit a ticket in Discover, and we can help you on a case-by-case there. You're talking about the Canadian stock market. Okay, we can investigate that further in particular. So yeah, feel free to submit a ticket, and one of our team will help you further.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Mike. It's very good to have you guys here because I don't have a clue. But yes, perfect. That's a very good point, Eric. I think that's something that we have recently been discussing, because I do appreciate that, especially if it's on a live site, it can be quite tricky to just explore and see what we can do about these. We are looking at creating a series of new training content, and we're focusing quite a lot on where being ready for a new application coming out, there should be some accompanying content for that. You should be able to see a series of these items already on Discover through our knowledge base application, but we are working on increasing that and adding a lot more to realistically help with that. Some of it may be video recordings to showcase that, or it might just be a written user guide, if you will, but hopefully it can give you a bit more direction with the newer applications there. As I mentioned, we have created a couple of them for announcements. I don't believe we have one yet, but I think that's something that we can generate for you if necessary. But yes, some of the other applications are available. We're also creating sort of like our own learning course, utilizing some third-party software to help us with like creation of SCORM packages and something similar, if you will. But that can help us with sort of like interactive learning content, making it a bit easier for, as you said, with newer components and applications being created, you not just having to sort of hope for the best, I guess, and exploring those yourselves. You're welcome. Okay, so as mentioned, realistically, from an 8.9 standpoint, those are all the sort of major factors I wanted to mention. For users who aren't necessarily coming from 8.8, there are a couple of other things that I wanted to showcase that might be beneficial. One of the clients here has already mentioned the implementation of a newer application which came out in 8.8 called Badges. So Badges is another newer feature and the flagship of the last version. But what this will allow you to do is, funnily enough, create a series of badges that can then be awarded and shared with other users. So we can see here, for instance, that on my profile, I have a series of badges already awarded to me. I have the ability to add more badges to myself, as well as, based on my permissions, assign this to another user, basically say why I'm assigning this to them. And then, of course, again, based on my permissions, create a brand new badge entirely from scratch, focusing around a particular sort of element here. I can use either some of the standard icons that we have available, or we have the ability to upload our own custom icons to make them a bit more sort of personal, I suppose. What this will allow you to do is, of course, as I said, create a series of these badges, which then can be awarded to individuals for achieving certain things within, the business, by completing a particular task within the intranet itself, and sort of having that additional element of sort of achievement and a record of that within the intranet here. From an admin side, this is, of course, where we'll see the permissions to basically say who can create these badges and who can assign them. You can also define as a sort of sub thing from the assign, but a manager can assign it to their subordinates specifically instead of the general assign, which would assign it to anyone of your choosing. You can also export these and archive any particular badges that are no longer relevant, if you will. And basically you can reactivate them from here or anything along those lines. Now, as I said, with these badges, you will see them from the user's profile when they go into the badges, or you'll see them from the user's perspective, should I say, when you go into the badges application itself. If I could spell badges, that'd be great. As we saw just a second ago, to load again. So again, these are coming from the Claromentis administrator perspective, but it is also worth mentioning that if, similar to the thank yous, if we go to a particular user, probably doesn't have any, oh no, got one at least, you'll see that this is also going to show the badges that that user has been awarded. Again, if you have the appropriate permissions, you'll also be able to award the user another badge from here as well. Again, this is a, the newer applications, hopefully, as you can see, are quite intuitive in terms of their uses. They're straightforward in sort of creating the content and then adding that content to other users. But realistically, this is another nice feature from a sort of interactive standpoint, a way to award users and promote that sort of interaction with the intranet as a whole. Can be very useful. It's something that we've had a lot of success with on our own intranet. Some certainly more creative than others, but it can be a very useful tool there. As mentioned, this is on a slightly newer version, a slightly older version, sorry. So instead of 8.9, this is from 8.8, but again, does have some benefits and something that would be presented to you from the upgrade to your current version to 8.9. So for anyone who maybe hasn't seen that yet, who isn't currently on 8.8, are there any other questions about that tool at all? It's a good question, Andre. I believe there has been some thought, I'm not sure if it's been via an API, but there's been some sort of discussion about maybe linking this to audit or something. Was that right, Gilly?
I think there may be an API for it, or if not, it's definitely something that we've been planning on doing. Just gonna jump in and quickly try and find some references.
Okay. Because I know we've sort of mentioned, as we can probably see here, at least, the sort of application and the awarding of these badges currently is all very manual, but there has been sort of talk of automating some of these, maybe from completing a piece of content, etc. It can award a badge, and maybe that's what the API would look at sort of integrating, but sure. Oh, I see. Good question there. So, okay. So from, let's have a look. So if we head back to badges very quickly, see a bit of more information from here. So as you can see, each of these badges are effectively interactable in a certain way. So if I was to look at Content Crafter here, to answer the question, sorry, so that's an interesting point about tying these to the thank you component. Again, they are separate right now, so it's not necessarily something that can be implemented, but it is worth considering. As I said, the idea of maybe automating and adding, maybe if you were to get sort of like 10 thank yous, etc., you might be awarded a certain badge. It would be very nice to have that sort of implementation. As I said, the idea of automating these things is certainly something we have considered. At the moment, it isn't possible, but I do like that idea, Jen. Yes.
Yeah, it's something that we have discussed before as well, because thinking about looking at the thank you report, for example, and wanting to reward certain users based on the amount of times they've been recognized for achieving certain, for fulfilling separate values, for example. So yeah, this is something we really interested on implementing in the future, but at this point it has to be a manual process.
Okay. And Tyler, sorry, just to answer your question here, hopefully that made a bit of sense. I know I've been floating on this for a couple of minutes now, but just so you're aware, again, if we look at a specific badge, you can click on that here. You can also search from it from the application directly, but this will show you all of the users who have been awarded this badge as well. And you can search for a specific user from here if necessary. But this will give you a full list of everyone basically who has been awarded this badge. Depending on your level of control and permissions, you will also be able to unassign a user from this badge as well. A bit mean, but certainly possible. But yes, hopefully that would help with trying to search for that. Eric, that's another good sort of suggestion, the idea of a badge being particularly group specific. If I recall, each badge that you create, let's have a look, is sort of, so if we create a new badge, as you can see, the only things that we can realistically give to a badge are the name and description of this. Each badge doesn't have its own unique permissions, which means that it would only be available for a certain group of individuals. But once more, it is certainly an interesting point. It would be quite nice to have that for, you know, specific badges for particular departments, etc. I can certainly see the benefit, and it certainly is something worth taking note of. But at the moment, it's not possible, I'm afraid.
It's really good. I just wanted to comment. It's really good seeing your questions and feedback about badges. We started with this application in almost like the minimum necessary to get the application out there, not really knowing what people will want to use it for. So seeing your comments now is really helpful. It definitely shows the need of being able to automate certain badges assignment and also be able to import full packs of icons rather than individually one by one. So it's really useful to see, and I can assure you that we'll take it into account when thinking about the next steps when it comes to this application.
Okay. Perfect. Well, we're coming up to the hour, which is the amount of time I'd sort of put aside for this, I guess. Are there any other questions that anyone has? Yes, I totally see that, Eric. It can definitely have that additional sort of benefit, really, can't it? And as you said, like, you can technically have those all available to everyone, but the trouble, I suppose, would be that it makes it quite hard to assign the correct ones and award the correct ones when there are so many different offices and regions in that regard. So it's definitely, as Gilly said, it is really nice to hear this sort of feedback and these ideas and suggestions from our users, and it really does help us frame and put a new sort of perspective on these, so as we can shape and improve the applications to your needs. Okay. Right. So I suppose thinking about it, from again, a slightly older version, there is another feature that I wanted to showcase to users from potentially sort of Clarimontis 8.5, if you're on that version or below. So again, not necessarily the newest feature here, but it's just another sort of aspect that I think might be beneficial thinking about it right now. And that's the implementation of a new way to apply these what are called fast access buttons. So previously, you may be aware that when implementing or utilizing this, you would have to go to an application called Slider. In fact, I don't think this exists on this version anymore. Yes, good, that's nice. And then this would allow you to create fast access buttons through here and define them and have them apply on your homepage, etc. The whole process wasn't particularly streamlined or intuitive, so we have created, and this was from 8.6 onwards, so it is relatively old, I suppose, in contrast to some of the other things we've discussed today. But just in case you aren't on this version, I thought it would be nice to show, as again, it just streamlines the process of creating these sort of nice buttons and accessibility to different parts of the intranet or offsite, and making it easier for you as a content creator to distribute this to your end users. So as mentioned, this new application is simply called Buttons. And what this will allow you to do is, even from the component itself, as you can see, is define, you will basically be able to generate a series of different buttons, and then you can define for this specific version of the component, the exact buttons you want to display on here. Okay, so only certain ones will be shown based on the ones that you've created. Again, based on your permissions, you'll also notice that you can add a brand new button directly from the component. It does have its own separate application where you can build and create them initially. But if at the point of building this sort of structure, you think, oh, we're missing a particular button that I'd like, you also have the ability to add this here, specify the URL, where it's going to link to. And again, either a series of standard sort of icons or use your own image to sort of replicate what this should be displaying. You can choose the different colors and the backgrounds there for generating a new button. But as mentioned, we can also see the ones available and ones which are currently defined in this little component. You can also readjust the order and rearrange how these will be laid. Originally, this was alphabetical, but it has since been improved to allow you to shuffle this, as well as change the style. So we're going to have the button with text underneath, just the button on a larger view, or simply just the text. And again, with this component, it's just going to allow you to have a series of quick links and access to different pages or websites available to your end users in a convenient manner. If we look again at the application, we can see here, as mentioned, this is ideally where you would potentially create all these buttons initially. You can add them from here, give a title, URL. It's the same information we saw in the component, but just a bit easier to maybe configure. You can also define permissions to say who particularly would be able to view or interact with this button here as well. And on the admin side, again, in terms of sort of configuration, what we've done for future applications, as you may be able to tell from all of this, is that the admin side is a lot more sort of just about giving those permissions and control on the front end, and not necessarily too much more there. But this will simply just allow us to say who can manage these buttons, who can create new ones, etc., and then add them to the components as necessary. But yeah, as I said, a very quick view of that additional component there, but I just wanted to make sure some of the newer sort of things to improve quality of life and functionality within managing and maintaining your homepage. Just thought that would be a nice addition in inclusion to the badges side of things. But yeah, is there, oh, okay, perfect. I've got some questions here. Yes, Bonnie, in regards to the idea of implementing gamification, it is certainly something that's been considered, and I think the badges are definitely like the first step into helping with that. Again, that can be seen in that manner right now, but it is looking at it from a manual process, but potentially, you know, interacting with, you know, submitting or commenting on X amount of news articles or making X amount of thank yous can certainly allow for, you know, potentially having that award badges, etc., would have that improvement in employee engagement, etc. I totally agree. Okay, Eric, so thank you for that, actually. So seems like you're using buttons already, which is good, but as you said, you're having an issue with displaying the image. So okay. Grant, that's a very good idea. And Eric, sorry, just out of curiosity, I'm a bit unsure. So if I go back to buttons, so you're referencing. Okay. So is that when you're creating the button? Sorry, Eric, that when you're choosing to use your own image, it's causing an issue, or is it just in general when you're viewing them from here, it's not necessarily showing the icon? Okay. Interesting. And it's sorry. Okay. Perfect. And is that from this view, sorry, or is it from the when you've applied it to a page, for instance, that component? Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Well, not perfect, obviously, but it's good to know. Sorry, we can. I'll take note of that, and that might be something that we can look into. It must be some form of bug that showcasing, but we'll make sure that we can get that remedied for you. But yeah, thank you for letting me know. Are there any other questions at this time? Sorry, about the features. As I said, we've hit the hour mark now, so I'm more than happy to answer any questions. But I can see some people are already leaving. If not, thank you very much for your time, everyone. But yes, I'll wait a couple more minutes in case anyone does have any questions there. Perfect. Thank you, Tyler, for that link. That's good to know. It might be the case. We'll look at that. But that's very good to hear. Thank you very much, everyone. Looks like we're all going for questions. But yes, take care. Have a lovely rest of the day. And hope to see a couple of upgrade requests coming in soon. Thank you now.
Thank you for the feedback. It's really useful.
Okay.
And thank you, Michael, for a great presentation.
Thank you. Okay. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye now.